Hello everybody, welcome to the 10th Google Hangout session of the Pixel Project's second annual fall edition of the Read for Pixels campaign. My name is Anisha Kandasivam, I'm your moderator for this session. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 12 award-winning and best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign. We aim to raise $1 million. These funds will be shared between the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence and the Pixel Project so that we can both keep up our efforts to end violence against women. If you want to find out more about the Pixel Project, please go to thepixelproject.net. Okay, so today in this session we have with us Scott Sigler. Scott is New York Times best-selling author of the Infected series and the Galactic Football League series. Hi, Scott.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi, I'm fine, thank you. How are you? Thank you for being here with us.
Very excited to be a part of this.
Okay, so Scott is going to do a reading, and then we'll have a discussion, and there'll be a Q&A session. But before we do that, I am going to tell all of you guys about the stash of goodies that we have. So Pixel Project has a stash of author goodies, or stuff that authors have donated, and we've set them up as perks for donors on our Indiegogo fundraising page. So Scott has very generously donated 2 fabulous goodie bundles. The first one is a set of signed, personalized, hardcover copies of all of his Random House books, which are the whole Infected series, Infected, Contagious, Pandemic, and the latest novel, Alive. That all comes in a bundle. The second bundle is Galactic Football League goodie bags. So that one has signed, personalized paperback copies of the first 4 books in the Galactic Football League series, which are the Rookie, the Starter, the All-Pro, and the MVP. And then there are 3 Galactic Football League t-shirts, and I think they are t-shirts of the teams in the Galactic Football League, and a signed copy of Scott's Geek Week card. So amazing goodies for you guys, for you fans out there. And they're all on our Indiegogo page. I will be telling you more about it a little bit later in the session, how you can get your hands on these wonderful goodies and how you can help the cause and donate. Okay, so like I said just now, Scott is going to do a reading, and then we'll have a live discussion in the Q&A session. You guys, the audience, can ask questions. Now, there are 2 ways to do this. If you are watching on Google Hangout, you can type your questions into the Q&A box, which you will see on the right-hand side of your screen. If you are watching this live on YouTube, you can type your questions in the comment section below the video, but you have to be signed into Google in order to do this. Okay, so let's not keep you waiting. On with it. Scott is going to do a reading, and Scott will read from his latest novel, Alive.
I'm reading from this book right here. It is Alive. It is book 1 of the Generations trilogy. I just finished the final draft of book 2 today, and I'm sending that off to editors and continuity readers today. So I'm in a very good mood and very excited. You guys have caught me in the past week. I was a miserable person to be around because the creative process sometimes is not as fun as it seems when you read the finished book.
Yeah.
So we're going to read chapter 1 from Alive. And I do chapter 1 because I have a female protagonist in this book. And in chapter 1, she hasn't started speaking yet. And when she does, my voice does not sound all that feminine, so it doesn't work out very well. So here we go. 1. A stabbing pain jolts me awake. It hits quick but deep. A here then gone stinging where my neck meets my shoulder. Did something bite me? No, it's just a dream. A nightmare maybe. That's not how I should wake up on my birthday. I'm 12. I can hardly believe it. I'm 12. I'm not a little kid anymore. I should get to sleep in. I should get to sleep all day. There should be cake and my friends, and I shouldn't have to go to school. School. The thought of that place chases away my excitement. I'm so tired. It feels like I've never slept at all. If I miss my alarm, I'll be late for classes again. Mom will kill me. I don't want to go. At school, the Tooth Girls and the Circle Stars always make fun of me. And I shouldn't be teased on my birthday. I hate school. I hate them. A tingling coolness on my neck. right where I felt that sting, tickling, spreading. Am I bleeding? I open my eyes to darkness, total darkness. I hear my own breathing, but nothing else, and I can't move. Curved bars, cool and rough, hold my wrists at my sides. I roll my hands, trying to slip free, but the bars are so tight they scrape against my skin. Mom? The word sounds too loud, almost a scream. Something is wrong. My voice sounds odd, kind of muffled. Mom doesn't answer. Dad? Nothing. I pull harder, but it's not only my wrist that can't move. Something holds my ankles, and my hips are pinned so tight I can't even turn. This isn't my bedroom. This isn't my house. My parents aren't here. My chest seems to squeeze in, as if it's clamping down on my hammering heart. My body tingles, every ounce of me screaming, get up, get up, get up, get up. Is anyone there? Nothing. Someone help me. This is... My breath catches. I don't know my own name. I thrash and pull, yank desperately at the unforgiving bars holding me down. Someone, help me! No one answers. I scream so hard it tears my throat. Someone had to hear that. Someone has to come get me, come help me. I wait, and still nothing. I lift my head. My forehead clonks against something solid and unmoving. That's why my voice sounded funny. There's a board right in front of my face. No, not a board. A lid. Padding beneath me and at my sides. Am I in... Oh no. Oh no. Am I in a coffin? Help! Someone get me out of here! The pain that woke me plunges into my neck again. A sting so deep it locks me up, all tight-eyed and rigid and frozen. I am trapped in the dark and something is biting me. Rage blossoms, gives me the focus to move despite my agony, gives me the strength to try harder. I push and pull, lift and twist. I focused all my strength on my right hand. Pull, damn it. The skin of my wrist tears against the rough material, but I have to get out. Push, pull, twist, yank, harder and harder until my coffin rattles. I feel the bar crack. I can move my right hand more, only a little, but I can move it more. The sting slides deeper into my neck, and I cry out. No one came before, and no one will come now. Will it hit a lung? Will it pierce my heart? Will I die? I jerk so hard the bones in my wrist grind against the bars holding them down. I hear another small crack, then another, and my right hand flies free. I slide my fingers up my body to my neck, blindly grab the thing slicing into me. My hand locks down on wetness, slickness, a cold snake that moves and wiggles. It's trying to slither away, but I have it and I won't let go. I yank it to my mouth and bite down, taste something horrid, crush my teeth together so hard my jaw hurts. I thrash my head, I bite harder. Something inside of it crunches. It falls limp in my hand and mouth. I fling it aside, then spit, trying to get that vile taste off my tongue. Right hand to left wrist. I grab the restraint. Its surface crumbles at my touch, powder falling away to reveal pitted hardness beneath. Right hand yanking, left fist lifting, the cracking sound comes quickly and my left hand is free. Both hands grab the bar that curves across my waist. I attack it. Push, pull, push, pull, push, pull, making the whole coffin shake around me. The bar breaks. Now for my feet. The lid is so close to my face and chest that my hands can reach down only to my thighs. I'm wearing some kind of short skirt. I must reach farther, must keep trying. I have to get out, whatever it takes. I twist to my right hip, use the ankle restraints as resistance to wiggle my body lower, reach down my left hand. My shoulder and face drag against the coffin's smooth lid, pulling at my cheek and nose and closed eye, but even then my fingers barely touch my knees. I must pull harder, harder. I must keep fighting, must get out of the darkness. If I can't reach my feet, I will die here alone and screaming, and my fingertip brushes against the rough bars pinning my ankles. So close, just a little farther. Contorted muscles and twisted bones vibrate with pain as I wedge in even tighter, but finally my left hand grips a bar. Grab and shake and yank, musket loose, crack, crack, both feet come free. I slide up the coffin until I'm again flat on my back. I press my palms against the lid. I push. It doesn't budge. I'm not strong enough. Think, you have to get out. I need to use my arms and my legs. Use all of me. I twist and turn until I'm lying on my stomach. There isn't enough room to get all the way to my hands and knees, but I push down as hard as I can while I arch my back against the lid. Sweat drips into my eyes. Sweat and maybe blood. I press until my back screams. Something in the lid snaps. A sliver of blinding light hits the bed of my coffin, so bright it burns to look at it. I close my eyes and I push even harder. I feel the lid lift just a little, enough for me to slide my knees all the way beneath me. I breathe, focus, and shove upward with everything I have left. The shuddering complaint of something bending and tearing. At the end of the fight, the strong lid breaks like a brittle shell. I am up and out and standing and falling. I land hard, kicking up a thick cloud of something powdery. My heaving lungs suck it in. The floor spins and whirls beneath me, and there is light everywhere, so bright it stings even through clenched eyes. Lying on my side, I blink, trying to see. I cough, trying to breathe. I wait for my eyes to adjust, hoping they do, before whoever locked me in the coffin comes to put me back inside once again. That is the beginning of Alive.
That was quite intense.
Kick that off. We kicked that up one off in grand style.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. All right. So my first question is: there is a really interesting sort of juxtaposition in the beginning when she's 12 and she's a big girl now, but you know, mom is going to make her go to school and all of that, and then suddenly she wakes up in darkness, and you know, and she does this amazing thing where she escapes. So did you do that on purpose? Did you like put in that contrast on purpose from like a small girl but somebody who can, you know, take control of the situation she's in and do stuff?
Yeah, that was totally done intentionally, and in chapter 2 it takes another quick twist as she starts to realize a little bit more about her surroundings and her own physicality. But absolutely, that's a play on, I think, even as you get older and become an adult, even a mature adult, there's still that constant feeling of when something really goes wrong and hits the fan, there's this assumption that there will be someone somewhere there to help you out with that thing. And as you get older and as you grow in the world, you gradually come to realize that there are people who will help you with a lot of things. But for the most part, you are completely on your own. You have to figure things out for yourself where you're going. And that's not something a 12-year-old typically has to go through. So in the opening chapter of Alive, there's a lot of wordsmithing and efforts to construct this, to try and bring the reader back to what that moment, what it was like to be that age, and to feel like you're becoming a big boy, you're becoming a big girl, and then to have that carpet completely pulled out from under you. Except in M's case, our main character's case, there is no mom and dad to come help her and save her and kiss her boo-boos and make it better. She's completely on her own, which the reader sees in the chapters that follow on after.
Yeah. Well, okay, so now I assume she's the main character because we see her first, and she is. Why did you decide to make the main character a woman, or a girl in this case? Would the story have been different if it was a boy?
I think the story would have been different if it was a boy character, depending on, again, I'm big into physicality in my stories. Your attitude and your aggressiveness determine a lot of things in life, but so too does your size. Yeah. And if you are a large, strong man, you have certain advantages in the world that people who are not large and strong do not have. And it continues to break down from there. There are certain advantages that come with gender for certain situations, size and strength for certain situations. So it was a matter of I wanted to set up a story where someone elevating to a position of natural leadership, because he or she has that it factor where people, you don't know what it is, but there are people, when you meet them, you naturally expect them to kind of take the first step in situations and handle it. But to make M relatively small, even for a female, and she then elevates into this position, it creates a different expectation. If the main character was some 6'2", 200-pound guy who's, you know, great athlete and physically gifted, well, there's a certain expectation that that person will step up in certain situations. If the person who winds up leading everyone, including the 6'2", 200-pound guy, is this 5'6" girl that weighs barely 100 pounds, that's a different style of leadership. So it was very much intentional to not make her physically weak, but to position her kind of in the middle as far as physical strength goes, so that when she does something, it is about her leadership, her authority, her ability to take over a situation, because she's the one who, number one, has the right idea, and number two, which is what all leadership is, she's the one willing to make the decision and move things forward. When everybody else is paralyzed and not sure what to do, Emma's a character like, this is what we are going to do, and we'll figure it out from there. Which is cooler when she doesn't have the ability to back down people who challenge her physically.
Yes, true. Okay, before I ask my next question, I just want to tell the audience that you can start typing the questions in, and as they come in, I'll read them out to Scott, and he will answer them. Okay, so now we were just talking about physicality and attitude and size, and she does say in the chapter we read just now that she said something like, I'm not strong enough. So, physically, what do you think then is a strong female character?
Well, I tend to ignore, this will sound weird, but I largely ignore gender in my work. There are strong characters, there are strong following characters, and then there are characters that want to be led, and then there are weak characters. So I personally believe that people who identify as male, people who identify as female, have so much in common that it's only a very small percentage of what makes us different that actually winds up making us different. The desire to love and be loved, the desire to be respected, the desire to be appreciated, all of these things are very common throughout all of humanity, throughout all cultures. We see parallels everywhere we look. So, you know, what defines a strong female character to me is exactly the same thing that defines a strong male character or a strong transgender character, which is, it always comes down to the people who are willing to take the heat, the people who are willing to make a decision and take the risk that is associated with being the person who steps up saying, everybody, this is what we have to do, and we're doing this right now. Are you with me, or are you going to stay here and do your own thing? The person who makes decisions for others is the strong character. So a strong female character is just like anything else. It's a person who steps up, makes decisions, makes the hard choice to do what has to be done. And that's what M is in this story. That's what most characters are. So how I define, to summarize that long-winded gas bagginess, is the way I define a strong female character is to make her not female, not male. It's just a strong character, and gender is irrelevant to the person who's willing to make a decision.
All right. You said, and you said in your recent Reddit as well, that your characters are quite gender blind. And you just said that you kind of tend to ignore gender when you write about characters. But do you think it's the kind of ideal utopia that you're thinking of?
Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely a utopian view. Alive, in particular, the Generations trilogy, I call it post-gender, post-racism. So we have a mixed bag of characters that, as you first read the first 3 or 4 or 5 chapters, you see tropes and physical appearance that we are familiar with on this planet right now, in our cultures right now. And I even use that as somewhat of a red herring. Well, here's this guy that we've seen in a million movies. Here's this girl that we've seen in a million TV shows. To guide the reader to have a certain set of expectations. Tropes are there for a reason, because tropes work, because people identify with tropes and want to see them again and again. But that also leads the reader to be manipulatable and gullible. Like, oh, I see this, and this constant reaction. I know where this is going. I've seen this a million times before. And then you use that so that when that takes a hard 90-degree right turn, the reader is a little bit shocked and surprised that he or she didn't know where things were going. And then as a creator, then I own them at that point. I have them drawn into the story, and they are very open-eyed and eager and willing to accept whatever story information I give them. And that's when the best reading experience comes in. When they stop being know-it-alls and think they know where the story is going and realize that they are just absolutely along for the ride. So is it utopian-esque? Absolutely. A lot of the troubles we have in a modern-day society, as a creator, I'm able to do two things with it. Number one, I completely skip over them. And that's sort of a cop-out, but by skipping over them and letting it rely on the end character and ignoring race and gender and socioeconomic status, etc., I at least hope that puts more focus back on the fact that these things we use to separate each other are not really all that significant. They're transitory, they're ephemeral, and we could ignore them if we so chose to. And then the final part of that is going to basic human nature. In Alive, they quickly find things to stratify each other and to be able to judge each other that are completely independent of gender and race. But that's unfortunately what human beings do more often than not, is find a way to judge other people and feel superior to them, and that happens in Alive.
I was going to ask you about tropes and all that, and do you think that contemporary storytelling is kind of moving away from that cliche of female characters, especially in horror, because you write horror, the whole cliche of female character on screaming and final girl and all of that? Do you think it's moving away from that into more fleshed out and real characters? Or
it depends on what we're looking at. In movies, in straight classic horror movies, there's an enormous amount of dramatic tension in the big, strong guys being taken out early or in the middle of the movie. And then you are looking at the final girl or the final girls and realizing that, number one, it's not raw strength that's going to solve this problem. It's going to take resolve and ingenuity and intelligence. And then in a classic horror movie, of which I'm a huge fan of the genre, it's ingenuity and intelligence, creativeness, resolve, and then at the end, she still has to have that physicality to finish the job. So in horror movies, the tropes have come out because it just absolutely makes more sense in the dramatic arc of a story. If your final person is, let's say, The Rock or Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he's going up against Jason Voorhees and he beats him in a fist fight, that's pretty cool, but you're not really surprised because it's The Rock or it's Arnold Schwarzenegger. If it's, Sarah Michelle Gellar who beats Jason Voorhees in a final scene, that's the classic underdog story, and we always gravitate toward the underdog. Predator worked real well for Schwarzenegger, as they went through so much trouble to establish that the Predator was absolutely physically dominant and couldn't possibly win that fight, and then he was the final person that had to go through that. Are we getting away from tropes? Sort of, but the thing is, when you're making a movie, certain things work and certain things don't. Boy meets girl, those things work. Boy loses girl, girl loses boy, them getting together at the end, all the stuff that's kept soap operas on the air for 50 or 60 years, that stuff just works. So I think we're sort of getting away from it. In some ways we are. You look at Veronica Ross' The Virgin series, for example, or The Hunger Games. Now that's a trope. The strong female character has become a trope of its own over the past 10 years, and almost to the point where it's expected in a lot of YA genre. But when those books came out, it really wasn't expected, and those were trope breakers, and they stood out for a reason. They were really well-written books, and they gave us something new. So I think it's still about 75% trope and 25% of a creator trying to be like, you didn't see this coming, and then those are the kind of things that hook us as readers.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. We got our first question from the audience.
Yay!
Okay, so here we go. I'm gonna read it out. It's from AB Kovacs, and she says, "Tropes are there for a reason, as you say. Is that also true in our real world for stereotypes? Do you think that stereotyping leads to gender-based conflict in real life, especially with non-binary genders? And if so, what can we do to change that thinking?"
I think stereotypes absolutely factor into our modern day culture and are a source of an enormous amount of problems. There are a lot of people of all age groups who approach people of a particular gender or racial class, etc., expecting a certain set of behaviors out of that person and not evaluating that person at face value right out of the gate. So stereotypes are a big problem, and becoming aware of, and everybody in the world stereotypes. There are no exceptions. Everybody in the world to some group around them, and it can be, people will be like, oh, I don't have any stereotypical views on anybody. I love everybody the same and I evaluate everybody. Do you hate hipsters? Oh, I can't stand hipsters. So there's always something that we have as our Achilles heel where we're judging other people based on how they look or the groups they associate with. And it's difficult for non-binary gender too, because that's a relatively new thing to a lot of people. They don't have the constructs around them to see these are just folks. These are just regular people trying to get by like everybody else, trying to figure out what's best for them. And especially in the broader culture, to stereotype broader culture, ironically, it becomes very difficult for people who are not in one of the fixed stereotypes to function in society without getting a lot of animosity and a lot of hate. And that's a major problem in our society right now. But I do think we're making an enormous amount of progress in that category. But it does fall into the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And the assholes out there who don't like things changing are the loudest and the most aggressive people in the mix. So they tend to draw the most attention.
Yeah. And we were talking just now before we went on air about how the Pixel Project as an organization gets hate mail because of the stuff we're doing, because people don't agree with certain aspects of it. And and you were telling us about all these people who, just want to say, just have their own view and don't want to listen to other people's view. Yeah.
Which is really the focal point of what at least my understanding of what the organization is about and what we're trying to combat against here is people coming out and speaking their mind, excuse me, is an absolute tenet of Western civilization, probably all civilizations at this point, where you're like, no, we don't like the way this is and we want to change it. And people reacting to that, excuse me, with violence in that, well, if you keep talking, we're going to end you or hurt you, is so difficult to understand. But, excuse me, a little bit of throat tickle. It's really, which is in some ways the way things have always been. It's largely always been that way. Once a group gets into power and control, when other people come against that group, the group in power control fights back against it and tries to stifle that dissent. Because anytime you have dissent, you are in danger of losing control. And which unfortunately leads to people in control fight back against people who dissent. People who are in dissent sometimes think violence is the only way to fight back at that, and then we get into that spiral.
Yeah.
But people reacting with violence to people who are saying, I want things to change, it's primitive. The only word for it is this is primitive behavior. This is caveman, cave girl behavior where people are competing for what we imagine to be our resources. So we're going to push them away from our resources so that we can preserve our own culture and our own way of life. Preserving your own culture and own way of life is great, but doing it by threatening violence against those who dissent against you is primitive, and it's something that we absolutely need to be on guard against. And it's wrong. You can't, everything you have right now, every culture you're in right now, every person alive today would not have what they have right now if something hadn't changed significantly in the past and multiple times. So fighting tooth and nail against change so that you can keep your worldview is tunnel vision, and it needs to be fought against.
Okay. Okay, we have more questions. Okay, well, I'll ask this one because you just talking about change. Regina asks, how do you think horror as a genre has changed over the years, especially in regards to portrayal of female characters?
Well, horror is a mixed bag, and it's difficult because most horror, literary horror, your Stephen King's, your Joe Hill's, literary horror has done a great job for decades. I mean, we're talking like late 60s, early 70s. Horror in books succeeds because women roles are not cookie cutter stereotypes. They're not weak victims. It's a mixed bag of male, female victims. And I challenge anybody to go back and find really successful literary horror that doesn't treat all people as in-depth, complex characters, as humans. And there's strength and weaknesses in different ways from people who identify different ways. So books-wise, we're golden. Everything's cool. We're doing a really good job. Movie-wise, it's super difficult because so much of movies is visual, and attractive young people in a movie sells movie tickets, and people who make movies, their job is to put butts in the seats so that they buy soda water and they buy candy, and like that's the game. So in movies, we see a lot more stereotypes put up. The hot starlet, the hot, perfect bodied guy, like those are what we expect to see in movies. Here's where I think it gets really, really interesting in horror movies. There's absolutely stereotyping. There's ageist-based casting. We don't get to see a lot of horror movies where people are in their 30s and 40s. It just doesn't happen. And that's movies in general, but we don't really see these things. We get a lot of perfect young women up on these roles, and that's not really all that good. And then there's an enormous amount of violence against these women. But at the same time, there's a lot of violence against the men too. But here's where it gets complicated for me in horror movies. Okay. The trope of the final girl has been a consistent standard thing in horror movies for 40 years now, since the 70s. So at the end of the day, we are casting purely based on physicality. We're often putting the crazy screaming girl who can't take care of herself as an early victim, and then the guys who can sort of take care of themselves as a mid-level victim. But at the end of the movie, it's always some whip-smart woman who lives to the end of the movie and winds up defeating the evil. Mm-hmm. So it's not a perfect genre, but it's definitely a mixed bag. And that's one of those things. If these tropes didn't work, Nightmare on Elm Street, those movies would not be huge hits all across the globe.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, I can see your dilemma in the mixed bag thing. Okay, so but talking about violence and people killing each other all the time and hurting each other. I mean, your stories, being horror and sci-fi as they are, do have a lot of characters doing horrifying things to each other or to themselves. Mm-hmm. Even. Why did you decide to show this kind of side to these characters? Or you see this side of human behavior?
Well, you can look around the world and watch a newscast, particularly recently, I'd say in the past year or so, and almost everything I can invent that does involve some kind of supernatural influence or extraterrestrial influence, everything I'm coming up with pales in comparison to what's actually going on in the world right now. So for me, it's the visceral reality of trying to take people that you feel like that you would hang out with and put them in a situation that is surreal and unreal and desperate and see how they would react. I read stories where it's just, like a Jonathan Franzen story, for example, where it's regular people doing regular things, interacting with each other in a regular way. And you can see the craft and the brilliance in those things and see the structure and how wonderful it is. But when I close that book, I'm like, I can look around my world and see this. So for my work, I absolutely have to have something in which I would never see in real life. Like the series I'm hooked on right now, which is Naomi Novik's Temeraire series, which isn't horror. It's alternate history Napoleonic battles with dragons as an air force. This is the kind of thing I gravitate towards, because now you get to see a completely different thing that didn't exist and watch how that would have happened historically. That's where I personally get hooked as a reader and as a movie watcher. So if that's the stuff that draws me in as a fan, that's the kind of stuff that I create. There's got to be something really grisly and out there that puts me into a place that I would never experience in my real life.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but how do you find a balance between depicting all this violence to move the story forward and to show what these characters are like, and just not showing violence for its own sake? Because that kind of happens sometimes.
It's a difficult balance, and a lot of times you have a crisis of conscience as a creator. At least I do. I can't speak for other creators. But the one thing that sort of goes through your head, and this has happened to some people, is what happens if I write this thing and somebody really digs it and wants to go out and mimic what was done in the book? And then does any of that responsibility draw back onto the creator? Mm-hmm. And that's a question we always have to ask ourselves. But in pop culture, the celebration of violence is prevalent. It's everywhere. It's almost impossible to find anything in the sci-fi, fantasy, horror space that doesn't involve an enormous amount of violence. Even something relatively, like by today's standards, relatively tame, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which was sort of lighthearted and campy a lot of the time, serious some of the time, but the whole thing, it was fights and stabbing and monsters, and there was all of this crazy stuff going on. Constant violence. So I don't really have an answer for that one. I kind of write the stuff that excites me, that I think would be pretty cool. And I think that the bottom line answer to that is sane, intelligent people are fully capable of parsing out, this is fiction. Mm-hmm. This is fantasy. This is something that we are enjoying in a completely safe environment where nobody's actually getting hurt, and it's all part of the dramatic tension of the story. It's about raising the stakes to the point where you actually are afraid for the character that you now have somehow become more real in your head. And the people who propagate violence that they read from fictional stuff, I firmly believe those people were going to do something crazy and violent anyways. It's just, they have a predatory urge to go out and commit acts, and if they find something to crystallize what they want to do, that helps them along their path, but they're going to follow that path absolutely regardless. Mm-hmm. Which, when you read about pathological criminals and repeat offenders and people who do the same thing over and over again, once they figure out what it is that satisfies them in that way, they're absolutely going to do that regardless of any cartoon, any movie, any TV show, any song. None of that matters.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And speaking of these kind of people, and also you were talking about news going on right now. You started your career as a journalist, and actually Regina has a question for you in the audience. She says, have you covered cases of violence against women, and how has working as a journalist influenced the way you write and tell stories?
Well, I'll answer the last part of that question first. The who, what, why, where, and how of journalism, and when, I forgot when. The basic elements of telling a good story in a newspaper that were established over 100 years ago are completely, they translate very well into a fiction story. You have to get all the basics. Who's the character? What do they want? What's their motivation? What's happening? Where is it happening? When is it happening? Giving the reader a good context. So the years I spent as a journalist writing a lot of newspaper copy every week have absolutely been a great foundation for me as a storyteller. But I got out of newspapers. I worked for hometown newspapers in Michigan, and we had and I covered, high school sports, school board meetings, all the fun stuff. And then we had a serial killer named Leslie Allen Williams who came through town and murdered 3 girls. So I wrote in a chain of 6 towns, and in each of 3 towns, we had a girl, 14, 15, and 16, that got murdered in those towns by this guy. So there's the initial surreal reaction, which is, that doesn't happen where you are. There's no serial killer where you are actually at. And there's a secondary reaction of like, my newspapers are actively covering this guy and these disappearances. And then you finally get to the closing phase of that, which is when they find the bodies and they catch the guy and you go through the whole trial process. It was really eye-opening to what we see on the news and the fascination we have with the misery of others is not just other people. That happens to real, genuine people, sometimes people that you've actually met and interacted with, that you've covered at volleyball games, and then they're gone because some guy decided that he couldn't handle what was going on and wanted to vent his frustrations in a particular way. So that was very interesting and very eye-opening for the world of journalism. And what got me out of journalism was the way the newspaper industry wanted my friends, my fellow reporters, to cover these things. Like, call the mom, every week, get a reaction from mom, get a reaction from the dad. And at some point you're like, these people are desperate to find their teenage daughter that's gone. But the newspaper industry operates on a process. It's a machine. And then when they actually found this girl buried on a golf course, 6 months decomposed, and my friend had to call the mom to get a reaction. If he didn't, he would have been fired. You're just like, at some point you're like, it takes a different kind of person to do this job, and I am not that kind of person, so I now opt out. But it did give some grounding to the fact that the horrific things I come up with in my books, those happen to real people every day. And finding a way to do that show that is integral to the horror genre and trying to make people understand it. This may be a fantastical story, but these are real things that happen to people all the time.
Yeah, and people always say that whatever you read in fiction, there's something much worse out there in the real world.
Yeah, the whole thing right now with Iceland and the beheadings has just been like, it's been shocking and staggering to me. You're like, okay, I know that stuff went on decades, centuries ago. And now watching it pop back up in modern day, you're like, there's this certain disassociation you have with like, this can't really be, there's not really people out there that are actually doing this, right? But it does absolutely seem to be a real thing, and it's a little shocking. So yes, whatever you can come up with in your stories, there's real life stuff going on out there that's more violent, more gruesome, and frankly, absolutely more depressing. It's some of the lower level, consistent violence and consistent abuse things where you watch it and you're like, it's not even like, it wouldn't even make a good story. Like, you can write about a serial killer and sell a bunch of books.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff people seem to gravitate towards. Writing about, systemic spousal abuse over the course of 20 years, there's a part of you as a human who's like, this can't actually be, somebody has to come in and do something, right? This can't actually be happening, but it is actually happening. So the stuff that goes on in real life is by and large worse than the fantastical stuff we come up with as creators.
Mm. Do you think that it's one of the reasons why things like domestic violence, like what you're saying, the systemic abuse of somebody for 20 years, didn't get a lot of media attention, or people don't really hear about it because it's not as sensational as the beheadings in the serial killer?
Well, the cornerstone of the word news is new, N-E-W, and news covers things that are unusual and draw people's attention. You start a war, it's 24/7 wall-to-wall coverage of that war. Once that war stretches out to year 3 or 4 or 5, we stop paying attention to the 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 American servicemen and servicewomen who die every week, or die every month, because it's not new anymore. It's just a constant, steady state. And spousal abuse, domestic violence, child abuse, child poverty, by and large, these are things that go on so consistently that the populace gets jaded toward them and stops paying attention. And news is a business. The news industry is a business. It's about ratings, it's about click-throughs, it's about reads, and you can get mad at the news industry to some extent for not continuing to cover this. But by and large, the news is just a reflection of what the public is interested in reading or watching or listening to. So yeah, these things that just go on day in and day out, tend to fall through the cracks of the media industry, and they don't cover them because there's nothing sensational about them because they happen all the time. If we had serial killers raging through America, 5 or 6 going on every week, even serial killers would wind up not getting a lot of coverage because it's on all the time.
Okay. I want to ask a bit more about this kind of thing, but before I do that, I have to ask a question from the audience. A.D. Kovacs has been waiting a very long time for me to ask you this question. She asked, will we see more of M and the Birthday Children in the future?
Yes, I just finished A Light, which is book 2 in the Generations trilogy series. So I opened up with reading from A Light. Book 2 is Alive, and I just today finished the final draft of that. And then that is off to my continuity reader, who does a good job of making sure I haven't missed any nuts and bolts. And then it goes off to Del Rey Spectra to publish that. So that's book 2. That'll be out April 2016. And then I will be immediately working on book 3. And hopefully I'll be able to get that one done too.
Okay. Do you consider yourself a really quick writer? What's your process like?
Say that again?
Do you think that you write very quickly? Because from what you're saying, I feel you write really quickly. Do you think you do that, or is your process?
I don't think I write very, very quickly at all. I think there's a lot of my contemporaries who write better copy faster than I write. Jonathan Mayberry, Chuck Wendig, people are putting out an enormous amount of books every year. I think they seem to have a better system than I do. So I write a lot, and then I edit a lot, then I edit a lot, then I edit a lot. And that process of constantly going over everything again, that's my style, but it takes a certain amount of time. I've been a full-time writer since 2008, and that is an enormous competitive advantage. The people who are actively out selling books but also hold down a day job or are even stay-at-home parents, something like that, I don't know how I would manage that process at all, because this is all that I do. So I do write. I write a lot of stuff throughout the course of the year, but I have an enormous amount of time to invest in it. I would like to write more better stuff faster than I write right now. It's always a process of getting better.
Okay. All right. We have another question from Robin Hudson, who asks, "What's the elevator pitch for A Light?"
The elevator pitch for Life, this one's really difficult because it is a girl who wakes up thinking she's 12. She wakes up in a coffin, can't remember her name, her parents, doesn't know who she is or how she got there. When she finally fights her way out of the coffin, she realizes she's in the body of an 18 or 19-year-old and wearing a schoolgirl uniform, and is in a room with 11 other coffins, 6 of which contain corpses, 5 of which contain boys and girls who are also 18, 19 in schoolboy or schoolgirl uniforms. And that's all that they know. And then they have to go from there to figure things out. So I will never write another series like this again, because when an educated person like the questionnaire says, "What's the elevator pitch?" I have almost no answer, because anything I can tell you about the plot winds up being a spoiler. So from chapter 2 on, they start discovering things about who they are, where they are, and how they got there. And if I reveal any of those, it screws up all the big reveals.
Okay.
So I did not realize that when I wrote it, that I would not be able to pitch it very well to questions like that or to Hollywood, etc., without giving away all the plot points. But I'm not going to give away all the plot points, so hopefully you'll pick it up and read it, and hopefully you'll enjoy it.
Okay. Just one more question about your writing process. So what do you do when you get stuck or you have writer's block? Do you have something that gets you back on track?
I never have writer's block. I'm very lucky in that regard. I've got the opposite of writer's block, which is new ideas popping up all the time. And my version of writer's block is just trying to stay focused on one story and not getting distracted by this graphic novel, or I want to write this one, I want to write this screenplay, or about this TV show, let's go do this. So trying to keep focused long enough to finish a book, which is an enormous amount of work, is that's the biggest challenge for me. As far as writer's block, I don't know how to relate to that. I never have that problem. But I do. The advice I give to people is, if you've never written a novel before as your first novel, just beam in an alien, have somebody shoot the protagonist through a sniper through the window. It doesn't matter. What matters is finishing that book, and then you will learn an enormous amount from the actual process of finishing and completing. Even if you're writing a bad book, that's cool. The skills you gain from finishing when you go to write book number 2 will pay huge, huge dividends. And if you are a more experienced writer, and this is your second or third or fourth novel, just put it away. Put that book, your writer's block, you're stuck, great. Put it away, go start something else. I guarantee you in 2 or 3 weeks, all of a sudden that thunderbolt's going to hit you and you're like, oh, that's what I got to do. And you're going to go back to that other book. So the biggest thing with writer's block is don't stress, just relax. It's all cool. You'll get it figured out eventually. There's no problem.
Good advice. All right, I want to ask you a question about geek culture. So
Okay.
it had its share of critics who say that it's still too male-dominated, despite there being quite a number of well-respected and well-known female authors. So what do you think can still be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether comics or gaming or book, more welcoming for women and girls?
It's a really difficult question. I think from the creator side, especially in the writing field, there's an enormous amount of really talented women writers out there creating a lot of super cool books and having solid sales, solid sales. The top writers in the sci-fi space, you've got Game of Thrones, you got George R. R. Martin, but then you also have the Harry Potter series, the Divergent series, the Hunger Games series, Twilight. That the sci-fi. If you look at sales figures over the past 15 to 20 years, women dominate the space in books. They absolutely dominate, and in revenue from adaptations of books to movies or TV. To movies in particular, Game of Thrones is an outlier. Again, you have women creators dominating that space. But they do that, and then men go and direct films, and most often than not, so you've got that area. So writing in the area I'm in, I think it's fairly competitive, fairly equitable. I think it's I feel like it's merit-based. It's based on sales. Movies become a whole different ballgame. Movies and TV, women are far underrepresented, are not getting the creative opportunities. How do you combat that? I don't have a lot of answers for that. I kind of write books for a living. I think what it comes down to is there needs to be more of an indie movement, the Tyler Perry type movement. Let's make our own studio. Let's make our own movies. Let's put out our own stuff. And when you do that, the cream will rise to the top. And when you've started to make money on movies, as soon as you've made money on movies, the people who make those decisions could give a rat's ass what you look like, what you smell like, what gender you're. They don't care. It's like the NFL. All they want to do is win games and make money. That's all they want to do. So I feel that's completely unfair, but that's one avenue to go through, which is screw you guys. We're going to go make our own thing, and it's totally going to rock. I think a lot of the difficulty that I see where there doesn't seem to be an answer comes from the fan space, which is people identify female expressing their joy for the geek culture and then getting a bunch of bullshit for expressing their joy for the geek culture. When they're not judging anybody, they're not hurting anybody, they're not taking away anybody's paycheck or lunch. Like, I effing love Batman. He's the best. And then there's some idiot out there going, screw you, Marvel's so much better, you dumb woman. And it's just like, that's the weird space where I don't have any answers and can't figure it out other than when that shows up, be vocal and show to the community, like, you don't need to do any of this. And there's some people out there who are doing a really good job of promoting that. Let's be more inclusive and let's just not be jackasses. But it's the people who are being the jackasses seem to be such outliers in their mentality that it's hard for people to relate to them and hard for people to communicate with them because it seems so ridiculous. Like, what are you angry about, man? Why are you so mad? This girl dresses up in a costume. Why is that a problem for you? You could dress up in a costume too. It would be awesome. Come to Dragon Con. We'll all have a great time together. So it's something that gets me a little fired up, and I don't really have answers for it. I have no idea what to do other than support the people who are being geeks, celebrate people who are flying their geek flag, and when it doesn't really matter what race, creed, culture, gender is, and you see somebody doing their geek flag, just let them know real quick. That's super cool. And I think that goes a long way to mitigating when the asshats show up and start dragging everything down.
On that note, what do you think that men and boys can help to stop this kind of attacks or just violence against women and girls in general?
Well, you know, I think they're related, but they're different things. In geek culture, it's you can be a role model without lecturing anybody or arguing with anybody or entering in any kind of serious debate if you don't want to do those things. You can be a role model with a tweet like, "That's cool," on Instagram. "What an awesome costume." You know, there's basic things you can do. If you see something cool, you should say something and add to the positive part of the engagement that's going on. And there is a lot of positivity, but we need a lot of positivity to outweigh the negativity. So what can men and boys do? Be positive, celebrate people who are in your culture, regardless of their gender, regardless of their creed, etc. And it comes back to what I try to do with Alive. If you don't pay attention to those things and just celebrate when you see cool stuff, eventually that's going to have an impact on people who are doing cool stuff and having a great time. Violence and threats of violence, I think, have to be handled much more aggressively, and that if you see those things, if you see something, say something. If you see somebody being an asshole online, you know, coming out and being like, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this? This person is just having a good time," and trying the best you can to not, you know, completely obliterate the person you're going after, because that winds up into a comment war or troll war, and nobody wins in that. But just coming in and saying, "Dude, this is totally not cool. These people are doing a fun thing. They're having a good time. Why are you threatening violence against it?" The problem is, it's in the Greek culture, the only people doing this, almost all of them are doing it anonymously, and people hide behind that shield of no one being able to shame them for what it is that they're actually doing. So it's a really difficult situation, and it doesn't seem to be a lot of things you can do other than celebrate the people who are celebrating, get in there along with them, and hopefully drown out the voices of negativity.
All right. Okay. I have two questions from Robin Hudson, so I'm going to ask both of them,
Okay.
but they're two totally different questions. So the first is, are any of your books headed to the TV or big screen? And the second one is, other than your mother, what women influence you the most and in what way?
There's nothing heading to the big screen right now. We have Nocturnal, a book I did, is being adapted for TV by Lloyd Levin, who produced Hellboy, Hellboy 2, Die Hard 2, a bunch of super cool stuff. Not a lot going on with that right now. And then the other one is Infected, is being prepared for TV, I should say, by the people who did Justified and Elementary, and Justified is one of my all-time favorite shows. So that's Sarah Timberman and Carl Beverly are doing that. And that seems to have stalled a little bit, but Hollywood's a weird game, and I don't really know how it works. So all I can say is that these things are in development, as they say. As far as women who have influenced me, one of the biggest ones is my business partner, A. Kovacs. We're 50-50 owners in our business, and I rely heavily on A for perspective on a lot of things. You know, being in some ways, it's a douchebaggy term, but being a guy's guy and not really understanding the stuff that's going around, because I'm a dude and everything's awesome for me, is getting some better perspective on people who have more difficulty in society or catching help for things that I wasn't even aware of at all. Like a lot of the things that A is educating me on, like I had no idea this stuff was going on. So that's a big influence. And then, I mean, I've got some of my main influences in writing, like Anne McCaffrey is a huge influence in my writing, and even Veronica Roth in Divergent, and watching how people tell stories when they do not think like I think is a huge influence. And it gives you the ability as a straight male to realize, oh, look at this particular emotional sequence where this person is very vulnerable, and watch how hooked into that I got and how much that moved the story forward. And yet if I had written the same story, I wouldn't have even considered putting that scene. It would have never crossed over my radar. It's not like going like, I'm not doing that because that's sensitive. It's like it would have never crossed my mind at all to touch on these particular subjects or these facets of these feelings. So a lot of time when you read a book that is coming from a female writer who looks at things differently, that can wind up being a huge influence me as a creator and absolutely as a person too. There's so many. Those are the big ones. But I'm a huge fan of the U.S. women's soccer team, and I've been watching them for 20 years now, watching them go through. I'm a big fan because I'm kind of an old school athlete, which is get hurt, rub some dirt on it, and get back in there.
Yeah.
And in men's soccer, pretending to be hurt is a major part of the game. It's an art form. If you don't do it, you are shortchanging your team and your organization. But I watch it and I can't. I'm like, Cristiano Ronaldo, stop it. No one touched you. You're great. Just go back to playing soccer. And what's amazing is you don't see that in the women's game. They're just tough and brutal, and they get knocked down. They get back up, and they're like wiping off blood, and they get back into it. So I get an enormous amount of inspiration and enjoyment out of watching the U.S. women's team.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, since we're just a little bit since we're talking about women's athletes, what do you think about this whole thing where people still think that women athletes are kind of second best? You know, they're just they're not. You know, and the thing that FIFA president said about women's soccer, like all this really sexist things. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, there's obviously differences. There's physical differences between the genders, and that's, in my opinion, that's okay. That's biology. There's nothing you can do about that. But if you can't appreciate women's soccer, turn it off. It's not that complicated of a concept for people who are like, oh, I don't enjoy this game. I'm going to go watch something else. That is such a simple, effortless thing to do. The fact that you feel that you need to give voice to your belief that this is a subpar product or they shouldn't be playing, etc. That's a deeper issue of sexism with those individuals and a deeper issue with women in general. You know, Ronda Rousey's a great outlier standout in the relatively new world of women's combat sports. And there are people who still complain about that. All you can do is just shake your head. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do. Soccer is a great standout because the women's game is much more team-oriented, much more passing, I guess much more German-based overall, and you can appreciate that for what it is. MMA, if you put Ronda Rousey in a ring, and she's absolutely no one even comes close to her. She's on a completely different level right now, and I don't think you'll find the average pro women's fighter being of her caliber for another 15 years or so when it gets up to there. But if you put her in a ring with guys, professional men fighters of the same weight class, that's going to be a battle. It's going to be a pretty big battle, and even a guy who's 12-8 or whatever is probably going to give her a pretty good run for money. Does that mean there's anything wrong with the women's MMA game or the women's combat game, or you can't enjoy watching two people who are highly trained go at it? I say absolutely not. And the people who complain about that, they're going to complain about something somewhere, and by and large, they just have a problem with women. You can't appreciate women athletics and look at it and say that these are world-class athletes, or even high school athletes, whatever level. These are people who work really hard. These are people who train for years. These are people who bust their ass to go out and do the best they can for their team or for their own individual sport. If you can't watch that and appreciate, that's on you. That's not on them.
Right on. Okay. Now, we were talking a bit earlier about the media and visibility of all this kind of violence against women and domestic violence in the media and in lots of other things. What do you think that people like you, authors like yourself, can do to support efforts to kick off social change to end this violence against women?
It's a weird dichotomy for me because I don't, it's not having to suffer these indignities and these troubles. It's trying not to put my voice out in front to say this is the way that things should be, because that it seems to be sort of off-putting, and also as someone who doesn't suffer as many of these things come out and say how we should handle these things seems to be stealing the voice away from people who actually are suffering these things and know what they're talking about better than I do. So I try and give my main voice through my creativity, through my work. And the way I do that is presenting that utopian world that we talked about earlier, where no one in the book alive ever stops to think, well, you're a girl, so you shouldn't be talking. Or you're gay, so we don't want to listen to what you have to say. Even though it's a fictional work, just putting these things out as this is such an accepted part of the culture that no one even thinks about it to me seems to be the best way I can communicate that. For example, no one, at least in America, almost no one thinks about the fact that every adult has the right to go out and vote. So even though as little as 50 years ago, that wasn't the situation. 100 years ago, that wasn't a situation at all. It's become commonplace to the point where we don't even think about it. So when you write a fiction story that involves an election, very rarely are you going to be talking about how these people are not able to vote. We got to give this whole cast the right to vote. It doesn't come up because it's commonplace and accepted. So in my creativity, it's largely ignoring gender problems and trying to make total equality normal, and also all of the other identifications. No one bats an eyelash at it. Even in Alive, which is a YA story, and The Light in particular, there's a gay relationship in there, and I draw attention to it by not drawing attention to it. It's just normal. It's the same as everything else, and no one gives a damn as long as those are good people. It works out pretty well.
Okay, so now you've been very supportive of us, of the Pizza Project and the Read for Pixels campaign, and basically anti-violence against women work that we're doing as a whole. Can you tell us why you are supporting us?
Why support your project?
Yeah.
Well, because it's one of the strange things about being a guy who doesn't do these things.
Mm-hmm.
Like any human being, we all have a tendency to believe that everybody else, by and large, thinks, feels, and acts like we act. There's a default that we all find ourselves, even if we think we're weird, we all sort of think we're relatively normal in our general approaches to life. So I don't commit violence on anybody. I don't commit violence on women. I don't commit violence on children. There's a natural default in your head where like, well, everybody's like that. It's just a few outliers who aren't like that. And the more you look around, the more you realize it's not really the case. And even if it is a small percentage, with 7 billion people, that's a huge number of people who are doing these things. So a group like yours, where you're able to contribute to somebody who's trying to get a voice out there and make people aware of what's going on. And also, a lot of the crisis hotlines and the crisis emails that you guys constantly tweet and constantly get out there. If you're in Indonesia and you're having this problem, these are the people you call. This is the place that you go to. Until I see some of Pixel Project's tweets, it never even crossed my mind that people would not know where to go for help. So that's kind of why I've been supportive of it. And you guys asked me to be part of this project. We looked into it. Like, it sure ain't gonna hurt anything. Yeah. There's no problem with this, and making people more aware of what's going on is a good thing. And the only people who are going to be offended by this are probably the people who are perpetrating the things that you're fighting against in the first place.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Scott, for supporting us. I have one last question for you.
Okay.
We've been talking quite a bit about your gender blindness and the utopian kind of society in that sense in your books. Do you think that there will ever be a time when our real world there'll be complete equality between genders, and then there will not be violence against a person just because they are a woman?
I have to give the depressing answer, which is no. I don't think there will ever be a time where that's commonplace and normal. I don't think the human species is wired to wind up in a Star Trek-esque utopia. I think it's a constant vigilance issue. I think that it's not just men, but it's men and women both who, when they get frustrated, react with anxiety and anger and outrage and violence and lash out. That's a human trait, to strike out against that which is opposing you. That's why we're at the top of the food chain. The problem is, you go back to what we talked about with athletics, and in a typical binary male-female relationship, the man is usually significantly larger, significantly stronger. And anytime you have that situation, when one is able to exercise his or her dominance on the other, in a large enough population, there's going to be a sample set that's going to do that So I don't think we'll ever escape it fully, but we have changed so much as a culture. Global culture is American. I really only can speak to the American culture. It's the only one I'm knowledgeable in. The amount of change that's gone on in this country in the past 100 years, even the past 50 years, is staggering. It's staggering now that things that used to be, you know, like you didn't, oh, well, she got out of line. So we just slapped around a little bit. It's no big deal. They're fine. There'll be a bridge club next week. 60 years ago, that was the way middle America was. That was small town America. Nobody paid any attention to that. That's not the case anymore. Is it perfect now? Absolutely not. Do we have to make further progress? Absolutely. But the middle has changed. The normal has changed significantly. So I don't think we'll ever reach a point where everybody loves everybody and we all get along great and you can speak your mind without any threat of any danger or from anyone. But we are getting better and we have a long way to go still.
Right. Well, and it's people like you who are, you know, giving voice to the, you know, this awareness to this kind of issues that help move it along this way. Okay.
It's a small thing to be able to contribute and participate, but thank you guys for having me. If I can help in any way, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we have to wrap up now. We're at the end of the session, and I want to thank all the audience who asked all those wonderful questions. And thank you so much, Scott, for giving us so much great answers and sharing your perspectives with us. It was really interesting.
Great.
Now, before we go, I promised to tell you guys about the goodies that Scott has donated. They are on our Indiegogo page. So again, there are 2 bundles of goodies that Scott has. One is a set of signed, personalized hardcover copies of all of his Random House books, which is the Infected series, that Infected, Contagious, and Pandemic, and his latest book, Alive, which is new out. The second bundle is a Galactic Football League goodie bag, which includes signed, personalized paperback copies of the first 4 books in the Galactic Football League series, which are the Rookie, the Starter, the All-Pro, and the MVP. And 3 GFL t-shirts, and a signed copy of Scott's Geek League card. Okay, the way you do this, the way you get your hands on these wonderful things is to go here. is.gd/R4P Indiegogo 2015. That's our Indiegogo page. You can go and find the goodies that you want and donate the amount that's stated there, and you can get your hands on it. If you only have PayPal, you don't have a credit card, you can still donate. You can go to is.gd/R4P Razoo 2015. You can get a set of exclusive Read for Pixels wallpaper for your laptop or your tablet or your smartphone. There's so many things out there. There's besides Scott, there are lots of other authors who have given stuff away. So please do find something and find Scott stuff. Give generously. All funds go towards the Pixel Project Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign to help end violence against women. If you want to know more about Read for Pixels and the other sessions that are coming up, go to is.gd/read4pixels, and all the information is up there. Okay, so again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Scott, for doing this and supporting us. And,
thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah, and guys out there, if you want to find out more about violence against women, what you can do about it, about the campaign that we're running, go to reveal.thepixelproject.net. And that's it from me and from Scott. Bye, good night, or good evening, or good morning, wherever you are, everyone in the world. Goodbye, we'll see you.
Bye, thank you.